high above the clouds, where the air is too thin to breathe, and one wrong step means death. A group of climbers stood on top of the world. They had made it to the summit of Mount Everest, but just hours later, many of them would be frozen in place forever. Well, because on this particular day, the mountain had decided that no one was coming down. In today's story, you're going to find out how human error, ambitions, and assumptions led to one of the most tragic experiences on Mount Everest. Welcome to Beyond Earth, your go-to channel when you want stories about paranormal events and strange phenomena. Now, if you're a fan of such stories, take a moment to hit the subscribe button, like the video, and comment where you're watching us from and what you think about today's story. Let's get started. On May 10th, 1996, what began as a dream expedition quickly turned into one of the deadliest disasters on Mount Everest. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain in the world, found in the Himalayan mountain ranges in the border of China and Nepal. It stands 8,848 meters or 29,031 feet above sea level. At such a height, climbing to the summit is an extreme venture and a dangerous one too, especially in the death zone, which is above 8,000 meters above sea level. At this point, levels of oxygen are too low to sustain human life for extended periods of time, and this usually results to severe physical and even mental deterioration. To climb the mountain, the total expedition will cost you over $50,000, and to this date, over 300 people have died on the mountain, with most bodies left on top, as it will be too expensive and risky to expatriate them. Some act as markers to future mountaineers, and perhaps a reminder that while there, something may go wrong. One example is Frances Asentiev, who was the first American woman to reach the summit of Mount Everest without using bottled oxygen on May 22, 1998. She and her husband, Sergei Asentiev, both died during the descent. Her body was visible to climbers, earning the name Sleeping Beauty of Everest until 2007 when it was moved from the view. Whereas climbing Mount Everest is an extreme sport, it feeds into the human ambition to conquer the impossible, and sometimes several fatalities. In fact, by 1996, the fatality rate of climbing the mountain was 1 in every 4 climbers. On this particular day, May 10th, 1996, 8 climbers will die. Among them, 2 of the most experienced guides on the mountain. This is a story of ambition, bad decisions, and a storm that came out of nowhere. In 1996, climbing Mount Everest had changed. Now, previously, climbing the mountain was a sport left to qualified and professional mountain climbers, but now with just the right price, you will pay a guide to take you to the top of the mountain just for the optics of it. This era saw an increase in commercial guides who could lead amateur clients to the summit of the mountain. Among the guides were 2 most respected professional mountain climbers, Rob Hall and Scott Fisher. Rob Hall ran a company called Adventure Consultants, and he was known for being calm, disciplined, and extremely professional. Scott Fisher, on the other hand, led a company known as Mountain Madness. He was bold, charismatic, believing in pushing limits. Both men had one goal: to get their clients to the top of the mountain. And so became evident one of the weaknesses of humanity: competition. Now, competition is good, but when it comes to climbing the Everest, it is better left behind. As previously stated, above 8,000 meters, your body starts dying. This area is known as the death zone. There is not enough oxygen, and this results into some dangerous state. Your brain slows down, your decisions become dangerous. Every second you spend there brings you closer to death. And following that, climbers have one critical rule known as the turnaround time. If you don't reach the summit by 2 p.m., you turn around. But this rule was broken on May 10th, 1996. In the early hours of May 10th, climbers began their final push. Previously, Weather forecast reports had reported a major storm developing on the Everest as from May 8th, that is, 2 days before the expedition started, and climaxing with peak intensity on May 11th. These reports were delivered to Hall and Fisher, the expedition leaders. At exactly 12 midnight, the climb to the summit started from Camp 4. Now this trip will take the climbers 18 hours, reaching the summit at around 12 noon and turning and heading back to Camp 4 and arriving at 6 p.m. in the evening. With headlamps glowing in the darkness and like a line of stars, the expedition started. For Hall and Fisher, this expedition was monumental. They didn't have enough bottled oxygen for a second attempt to summit the Everest, which meant that should this first attempt fail, they would have to give up the expedition and go back to Camp 4 that's just below the death zone. They had to make sure that their clients achieved the goal. Among the climbers were Sherpas. These are people who have adapted to the mountain conditions and can survive the harshest conditions, carrying luggages with no supplemental oxygen. They are born and raised in the Himalayan mountain, and that's their home and their playground. The work of the Sherpas in this particular expedition was to set the fixed ropes in place for the tourist climbers. But almost immediately as the climbers started climbing, things started going wrong. The fixed ropes, essential for climbing steep sections, weren't fully set. They had to wait for around an hour for the ropes to be put in place by the guides and the Sherpas. However, on this particular day, 33 climbers were attempting the summit that day, and Hall and Fisher ordered them to stay 150 meters of each other, creating a bottleneck at Hillary Step. They waited and waited, burning precious oxygen, and time slipped away. At this point, some climbers decided that, you know what, this is not worth it. They were afraid of running out of the bottled oxygen, and they decided to turn back and head back to Camp 4. Considering the delay, by the time the climbers reached the summit, it was already too late. Some arrived at 3 p.m. and even at 4 p.m., hours past the safe turnaround time of 2 p.m. They had been ordered to turn back in time, but ambition had gotten the better part of them. The summit was just a few meters away. They had seen it. They had to get there. Some of the clients, including Doug Hansen, who had failed to reach the summit the year before, refused to give up, and guide Rob Hall decided to stay with him and he wouldn't leave him. But this decision would cost both of them everything. For Scott Fisher, he wouldn't summit until 3:45 p.m. that day. His condition was not great either. He was exhausted and ill from high-altitude pulmonary edema and high-altitude cerebral edema. Doug Hansen and others reached the summit even later. At 6 p.m., when the climbers decided to descend, the sky changed. A storm rolled in, a blizzard, fast, violent, and forgiving. Wind screamed across the mountain, snow blasted sideways. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The fixed ropes placed in place were buried. Climbers couldn't see the path, and the trail back to Camp 4 was obliterated. The climbers could not see even the camp or even each other. Some wandered just meters away from safety and never found their way back. A group of climbers became stranded near the South Pole, disoriented, frozen, completely mobile. Among them was Yasuko Namba, who had already climbed the highest peaks on every continent. Now, she couldn't even find her tent. Nearby, Scott Fisher, one of the strongest climbers on the mountain, collapsed in the snow. Exhausted, oxygen deprived, his body simply gave up. Despite rescue attempts, he never woke up again. On May 11th, at around 4 a.m. in the morning, high in the mountain, Rob Hall was still alive, but barely. He had made a radio call to the camp stating his location and state. By 9 a.m., he had fixed his oxygen mask but still had difficulty in moving. Later in the afternoon, he made a radio call and requested to be connected to his wife through the call. His voice, weak and fading, speaking to his pregnant wife back at home, he assured her that everything would be well, and in the same call, they would pick a name for their unborn child. Shortly after, Rob Hall froze to death in his sleep, and his body would be found 12 days later on May 23rd. But as per the request of his wife, his body was left exactly where it was found. As for Fisher, he will be found on May 11th, but his condition had greatly deteriorated and will be given palliative care and just left there. By the time the storm had cleared and the ordeal ended, 8 climbers were dead, some a few meters away from safety, others completely lost in their terrain and frozen in place. The 1996 Everest disaster changed the conversation around extreme mountain sports and mountain climbing. Should the sport be left to professionals, or should people be guided to places where even one small mistake means death? Because up in the Everest, it doesn't matter how strong you are, how professional you are, but if you decide to stay on the mountain a little bit longer, then the mountain may decide your fate too. And the most surprising part is that most of these climbers knew that they were late to get to the summit, but they couldn't turn back because reaching the top sometimes means never coming back down.